Identity, a social construct in identifying the self as a true representation of individuality, capable of exclusion and rendering the outsider objected. But what does it mean to have an identity, and what measures of identification do we use to identify? In trying to describe my identity to you, I am here wondering what exactly can I tell you about myself to reveal who I am? Or how can this attempt lead to a universal equation of identity, applicable to each and every one? Replacing me in front of the camera would be no problem, it would be the goal. But then, who would need that form of identity that can be easily calculated? Stuart Hall argues that in responding to this question, we need to focus on decentering the subject of the identified as well as observing deconstruction. Instead of finding a truer knowledge, identity must be deconstructed and examined outside of its original paradigm. He uses Derrida's argument as it shows a new way of thinking that couldn't be included in the old original reconstructed way. Identity itself is not an easy concept to examine. Through naturalist definition, we draw recognition from differing signifiers to achieve the signified. These could be different ideas and perceptions to create an identity. They are constructed through recognizing common origin or shared characteristics with another individual or a group. If we examine this approach in more of a discursive way of thinking, as Stuart Hall quotes, identification is seen as a construction which is always in process but never quite achieved. This process is recognizable in Derrida's deconstruction theory. Through this thinking, identity can't fit a totality or a complete link to another group. Always existing a form of difference and reducing the stability of a unitary thought that previously identity provided, for example, I am this because of being from here, as history has developed in time, links are no longer identical. The production of collective thought fragmented through different approaches to identity, varying through historical, ancestral, and political events. What is my starting point?
How would you describe identity?
Identity is something, I think it's an attempt to describe yourself. Who am I? And I think with identity you're trying to answer that question. I would also say that identity is the attempt to sum yourself up, if that's English. Like if you would actually really try to answer the question, who am I? You can go on for years and it will never be finished because you are never finished. I would want to describe my identity. I would rather pick a positive future image of myself, how I would like to see me, like a process of reflecting on myself. I would actually argue that it's impossible to describe my identity right now, if there is such a thing as identity. I think it's a rather abstract concept, identity, like this picture, this whole thing that you want to have from yourself, that you're going for, like I want to have this wholeness. I don't think that you can achieve that. It denies the existence of authentic and originary identities based in a universally shared origin or experience. Identities are always relational and incomplete in process. Any identity depends upon its difference from its negation of some other term, even as the identity of the latter term depends upon its difference from its negation of the former. My passport. It includes a picture of me when I was, I think, 16, 17. I had red hair at that time and different glasses. It tells you when I was born, where I was born, my first name, my second name, my last name. I signed it. I got a number. This is my German identity. Mein Name ist Lenia Busch. Mein Mittelname ist Maike. Ich wurde am 15.02.1991 geboren. With this identity, with this number, I can cross so many borders. With this identity, with this number, are there borders? As Hall puts it, identity is a structured representation which only achieves its positive through the narrow eye of the negative. It has to go through the eye of the needle of the other before it can construct itself. Identity is always a temporary and unstable effect of relations, which define identities by marking differences. Party. Hallo, Mama? Na, Mamutschka? Ich dachte, ich melde mich mal kurz. Eigentlich nichts Besonderes. Wenn du nach Aberystwyth ziehst, dann wird es ja nur grau und regnerisch, weil ich in den Wintermonaten da bin. Aber ich finde, dass ich erstaunlich viel Sonne hier hatte. Auf das Kussi an Heidi. Bis ganz bald. Schönen Abend noch und wir hören uns. Bis dann. Ich dich auch, Mama. Bis ganz gleich. Ciao, ciao. Ciao. Bella. Tschüss. I say something, but I can only say what I was saying until I finish my sentence and see your reaction. My mother named me Lenia Maike Busch. Lenia is Russian and means beauty and forbidden love. Lenia, 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 Bobenia, Banana, Fana, Fofenia, Bi, Bobenia, Lenia. This is my Facebook me. I chose those pictures because I think they're as pretty as it gets with my face, or they show how adventurous I am. Why do I have only one Facebook profile? Why do I have only one identity? Or why do I aim for having only one identity? I don't want all the people to see the same. I want to have control. I'm constantly reinforcing and circling my identity. When I Google my name, I Google my previous self, like a past self. So there's like a lot of footage of me on the internet, and I'm always surprised when I find it because I didn't put the photos up there. So there is a secret identity, a virtual identity of me walking around through the internet, showing a side of me that I maybe don't want to show all the time, but it is there. Who is politically qualified to be, to represent, to be part of society, to be a part that has a part? Rather than thinking about politics as a struggle that takes place between pre-established interest groups or classes, Jacques Rancière's understanding of political struggle means the longing of a part which has no part to finally have a part by turning their interest into something sayable, audible, and or visible. The part which has no part therefore struggles with the established social order. Following this, political struggle, as Rancière defines it, occurs when an excluded party is determined to get their voices recognized as legitimate, going after the wish of being able to make a claim. How can I hold on to the reality of a situation, and how can I have impact on it? Mein Name ist Lenia Busch, mein Mittelname ist Maike. Ich wurde am 15.02.1991 geboren. Witnesses are proof of a memory. They can confirm it actually happened. Or can they? We only have a certain amount of words that can only describe as much as they can. There is a huge gap between what we think, what we actually experienced, and what we describe to others. So two people describing one event in the same way could still mean they experienced something completely different. The What I Really Do meme went viral and still comes up in the World Wide Web from time to time. It shows different perceptions of an action, let it be a profession or a simple task. It is a perfect example for the flexible and dynamic perception of one reality. The perception of the dress is chaotic, mysterious, and scary. People fight people over seeing the wrong reality, but they only see what they can see. Who am I to talk, to judge, to be here, to represent something, anything? Time to tell you who you are. You're famous. You're a wizard, Harry. Do I sound like Hagrid? I want to sound like Hagrid. Who are you? Who? Bodies are produced through the media we use. Authenticity? What is real? This is not my story. The reality of the virtual describes the effects produced by something that does not yet exist. Hatsune Miku, a worldwide sensation causing excitement across the globe with her astounding and flawless performances. Who would have known how perfect someone could be on stage? Perfectly rehearsed, perfectly dressed, perfectly choreographed, perfectly created. Hatsune Miku is a Vocaloid, as in vocalist and android, a hologram that performs worldwide. She is a created persona, similarly to the performances of the Gorillaz or Daft Punk, who use created personas and imagery whilst performing their music. The difference, however, is that Hatsune Miku has no identity of origin. All of her performances are virtual. But what does that mean? After all, we're able to attend a place of performance. She's there, on stage. Hatsune Miku's songs are created by her fans. The singing, the lyrics, the music. All of it is fan-created work. To attend one of her concerts and applaud her performance forces the question, who am I applauding? The performance of Hatsune Miku? The created virtual spectacle, so the tech team? Or the performance created by myself and the other fans? What performance am I enjoying? Her performance as a vocalist, despite her vocals being completely computer-generated? Or her performance of identity? Hatsune Miku's reality is of one we could refer to as hyperreality, a form of reality that has been created based on social models and ideals. It has no previous background to itself and is completely fictionalized, allowing some to create their own ideals of the perfect world. The concept of simulation is distinct in that the hyperreality, in which it is created, simulates from a previously created image, an image in which we may recognize and then regard as faithful. The image, however, is simply a representation. The blurring of boundaries between one reality and the other becomes existent, and we see this with the world of Hatsune Miku, her performance representing the image of a live performer on stage, but in reality is nothing more than a projection of light, emitted sound waves, and data. Yet, because we see her on stage, we see her performing, our minds encourage us to believe that in this moment of her performance, because she is right in front of us, she is a real human being. Here we ourselves are committing to this identity. We are providing an identity even by referring to this creation with gendered pronouns. We are submitting to the idea of an individual who is blurring the boundaries between our reality and a virtual one. The reality of the virtual describes the effects produced by something that does not yet exist. Identity is something that we carry around and is always in progress. We are in the process of producing different types of bodies. I secretly think that reality exists, so that I can speculate about it. Identity is a burden. Identity is a privilege. We can't know all the truth. The real exists, but what is it? Does my identity end where the table begins? Does your identity begin where my frame ends? Here is my deconstruction. A deconstruction of appearance, perception, and surveillance. When my outfit changes, my body changes, and myself changes. You weren't looking, we weren't looking. You only see my professional body, not myself. Identity. How can we deconstruct this notion of identity? In exploring deconstruction, I shall be challenging the use of binaries. Rather than using written language in the addressing of identity and reality in written language form, the use of the visual and imagery shall be used alongside audio. We are taught by Derrida that identity is irreducibly multiple and can't be purified. He claims that the structure of identity, in considering subjectivity, is nothing but a collection of different perceptions. The mind is a kind of theatre where perceptions successively make their appearance and glide away. If I am the subject, and created out of nothing but perceptions, impressions, and ideas that are not connected, then how do these create a unity that in itself creates who I am? Derrida's deconstruction focuses on decentering the structure of which we have used to decipher identity, arguing that this union of ideas and perceptions only exists in reflecting upon them, and with nothing belonging to these perceptions that can unite them. Derrida argues that the claim to identity is therefore a quality of this. With these perceptions not being unitary, there is then no ground on which to suggest any of these ideas actually contribute to who I am. The truth of identification of the self is questionable. Presence, especially within consciousness, is no longer a central form of being. Instead, it is the determination and effect of being. Identity of presence is prevented by temporality. There is no possible literal self-presence, as the living present cannot be captured in the act, as it can only be made self-present once it has passed. This delay, so to speak, is the signifier being delayed by time, meaning the signified, the subject, is never achieved. In thinking of this, there is no such identity, only difference. Difference postpones identity and meaning, opening all texts and contexts in this exploration. What, therefore, is the self? Is this answerable? All these signifiers towards the subject themselves have no identity. To create an identity, I need, among others, simplification and standardization. I can break myself down into stereotypes, groups, and numbers. Is there a scientific truth of the identity? Is it data? Is big data the truth? Because it is repeatable, detectable, and logic. Ignoring the fact that it is dangerous because it standardizes and simplifies and judges upon all that. Let us recognize the human behind the rule. What does authority and power target? How can it be resisted? Only when you name something as separated or parts, it starts to exist. I have to get used to seeing my image in the mirror, especially the back of my head perspective. I can still feel this feeling of being unfamiliar with it. It makes me cringe. Children become capable of recognizing their mirror image. It is a recognition that brings the child great pleasure. For Lacan, we can only explain this jubilation as a testimony to how, in the recognition of its mirror image, the child is having its first anticipation of itself as a unified and separate individual. Before this time, Lacan contends, the child is little more than a body in bits and pieces, unable to clearly separate I and other, and wholly dependent for its survival upon its first nurturers. My subjectivity is fragmented. My outside identity is an identity that I rarely see. Only my reflection gives me an idea of the gaze of the other. I am separated from the world. What we want to be and how we want to see ourselves are two different things. My standalone identity or entity, the desire for a purpose or a function. Am I following the utopian drive to see myself as something whole, even though that's not how it is? The image gives a frame and limits. Our limits to grasp identity are shown in the medium we chose. We're trying to frame something that has no frame, to show a perspective on something that has uncountable perspectives and is always in progress. I like the idea of deconstructing the self, playing with the following aspects: appearance, perception, knowledge, construction of an identity, deconstruction, social media, virtual and digital identity, and effect on real identity, surveillance, big data, politics of positioning, surface, judgment, layers, body, blood, skin, voice, power, revelation. I say something, but I can only say what I was saying until I finish my sentence and see your reaction. Identity, such as power, must be negotiated all the time. I have nothing to hide. Fake, real, fake, real. Identity is still here. Identity has still impact. Who is identity? Who am I?